Yes, sir. Missing nothing, and some can't do say, we leave a mirror, we're bringing you, yeah, now I can't for those. And me, I want to us, and I know your town for see when you know. And then met you, may won't see it and won't send kick a baby. When you are kind of very white, and son, I can't hear you. Missy who made you may win, and found pussy there, y'all. For your cup, and say, a car won't come and make me say you. And so I know you are my faint, you know, Missy, a sound for break out. And see a rabbit, you cry. Subject, sister woman, you cry.
Oh, and now I can't, and I'm a farmer, baby, and some can't do. So when I send Kaya, crying and the people want so. So when I send Kaya, crying and the people want so. So when I send Kaya, crying and the Paparia Kayan,
you cry.
Colleagues of Pro Forum for putting this together, and also the Center for Ethical Governance and Administration. There are several occasions on which I have suggested to this government that it does help in certain times of difficulty to try to build a consensus on policy going forward. And I give the example that it worked for me at a time when we're facing strong headwinds in the economy. And Seth and others, PV Obing of blessed memory and others, came together and said, look, why don't we hold a national dialogue on the economy and bring everybody together so that we come out with a homegrown fiscal policy that all of us can have a buy-in to. And that led to the Senchi Forum, which was held at the Senchi Hotel. And Seth, PV Obing, and several other people were key in bringing this together. And it led to the homegrown fiscal policy, which we eventually, when we went into the IMF, presented as our policy document. And it was adopted hook, line, and sinker. Nothing was added to it. And it was on that platform that the economic turnaround began to occur. I suggested it several times, but it doesn't look like that is the... Should I take it off? Well, some people say they can't see my face, so... Since all of you are in mask, I can take mine off and feel protected. And so it led to the homegrown fiscal policy that led to the economic turnaround and the fiscal consolidation that we began to achieve before we handed over in 2016. In the absence of a national dialogue like that, platforms like this are important to give the other perspective. You know, government has access to all the tools of communication, and so monetary policy committee report, so report, the finance minister comes to parliament, gives a media review and all that. But you need platforms that will give other perspectives to what government's hymn sheet is. And I think that that is what we have attempted today. For those of you who are not students of economics, you must have found the tables and things a bit boring. But we intentionally came here to the University of Ghana Business School, to the CD conference room, to give, the students here, an opportunity to look at what the other side was. And I think that Seth has given a good technical perspective. I am not an economic expert, and so my presentation would deal more with bread and butter issues. As a politician, I'm not going to go into tables and others, but I will say it as I believe it is. And so, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by thanking Mr. Seth Tekpe for his comprehensive delivery, which has brought home a number of key issues surrounding our recent economic trajectory. I do not intend to belabor the points he has made, except to reinforce a few of them. I'm a historian at heart, and so I like to look at these things from a historical perspective in order to give context to what we are witnessing today. Much has been made of the impact of COVID-19 on the Ghanaian economy. The truth, however, is that our economic history has, over the last few decades, been characterized by booms and busts, dictated by both domestic and external factors. For those of you who have looked historically at the Ghanaian economy, we have periods where we have booms, and then we have periods where we have busts. Most of these busts are created by either external economic shocks or some prevailing conditions within. Since the days of President Jerry John Rawlings, and even before then, these shocks have cyclically derailed incremental progress made over the years. The older generation, for those of you who are my age and around there, would recall how bushfires and droughts in the early 80s plunged the Ghanaian economy into crisis, leading to a very lengthy period of negative growth and very high inflation. By dint of hard work and skillful management, the then NDC government managed to salvage the economy and brought back sustained positive economic growth. For those of you who remember the Economic Recovery Program, the Structural Adjustment Programs, and all the acronyms that came with them. And when some people fell through the social safety nets and we needed to find social interventions to support them, we came up with the PAMS card, Program of Action to Mitigate the Social Cost of Adjustment. For those of you who are my age, you remember all those things. And so it brought back positive economic growth until this was again undermined in the early 90s by falling commodity prices, which led to dwindling export revenues in the 90s. When the Kufuor administration took over, we went into the Highly Indebted Poor Country Initiative, HIPIC, for those of you who remember, in order to secure debt relief. Up to $3.8 billion of our debt was written off. And this offered significant fiscal space for us to begin the process of development again. At this period too, there was a transition in the structure of the economy from one, it started in Kufuor's era and it crystallized in Professor Mills' era, because I remember in 2010, that was the year when services overtook agriculture as the biggest contributor to the Ghanaian economy's GDP. But the process started in President Kufuor's time. Services began to grow at an astronomical rate, and by 2010, they overtook agriculture. And so it changed the structure of our economy. In the latter years of the President Agyekum Kufuor administration, we discovered oil in commercial quantities, and we joined the League of Oil-Producing Countries. A global financial crisis reared its head around this time, and this also impacted our economy negatively. Then in came the Mills administration, under which I had the privilege of serving as Vice President and head of the economic management team. We in turn inherited a large budget deficit and huge arrears, as well as a depreciating currency. The effects of the single spine pay salary also impacted revenues. Many people tend to overlook the fact that it was during this era that Ghana also recorded its most prosperous period of economic management. We had the highest levels of economic growth before oil production kicked in. For instance, in 2010, we grew at 8% without oil. non-oil growth. We didn't have oil. We grew at 8%. And then at 14.4% in 2011 with oil. By this time, we had become an oil producer. That was the first year of oil production, which happens to be the highest growth Ghana has experienced in history. But let me say that non-oil growth for 2011, that is without oil, was 8.4%. Oil topped up to make the 14.4%. And the following year, 2012, we grew at 9.3%. We also achieved the longest sustained period of single-digit inflation of 33 months, among several other important milestones. The cyclical shocks came back with a vengeance between 2013 and 2016. These included problems with power production, for those of you who remember, when unreliable gas supplies and frequent breakdown of power generation equipment resulted in a protracted power crisis that severely affected our economy. This was compounded by huge revenue shortfalls in the oil sector because of the lower than expected production from our only oil field at the time. At the time, we had only the Jubilee field, even though at this time we were working on E&I Sankofa and the 10 field. There was a problem with the turret of the FPSO, Kwame Nkrumah, if you remember. And so they had to make some adjustments and reduce production to keep it going. So instead of 120,000 barrels, we're producing about 70,000 barrels. And that affected oil revenues. So all these were shocks again that came after booms. So we have booms and busts, booms and busts. When confronted with these challenges, we put in real efforts to address them comprehensively and laid down critical structures that today have become some of the most important pillars supporting the Ghanaian economy. And Seth gave you the example of the Energy Sector Levy Act, which has become one of the most important domestic revenue pillars that we have. When we inherited the oil economy in 2009, we put in place the necessary mechanisms and institutional arrangements to ensure that Ghana derives the maximum benefit. We passed the PRMA, which is the Public Revenue Management Act, under which we set up the Stabilization and Heritage Funds with about $500 million in them at the time we left power in 2017. We tackled the power crisis head on, and by the time we left office in January 2017, we had more than sufficient generation capacity to withstand any shocks in the energy sector. And above all, we brought stability to the energy sector and reliability in fuel supply for power generation when we built the Tuabo gas plants to process our own natural gas. And as I said, we set up the Energy Sector Levy Act, which by 2024 should have yielded up to about 40 billion Ghana cedis. This stands us in good stead to overcome the stifling legacy debts in the energy sector and help address the liquidity challenges in that area. We set up the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, GIF, to mobilize capital to undertake major infrastructural projects. And one of its first success stories, many people don't know this, is that GIF was included in the structuring of the financing of Terminal 3 at the Kotoka International Airport. We also established the Ghana Exim Bank to promote trade and commerce and industry within the Ghanaian economy. We set up the Sinking Fund, which is a mechanism through which we would set aside funds to retire maturing debt. And as of 2016, we had saved up to 550 million to pay off the first sovereign bond, which was floated under President Kufuor. If you remember, the first Eurobond was due, and we had saved up to 550 million. We did it, of course, hoping that we will win the 2016 election, but of course, we did it for Ghana, because when this new government came, but for the fact that we set aside that money, they would have very serious problems paying off that bond. We also had the contingency fund from which money was found recently to underwrite the relief efforts in the aftermath of the 3rd June disaster. No, we set it up after our experience with the 3rd June disaster. We did all of these alongside massive investments in capital projects with a view to accelerating our economic development. We ensured that we kept our public debt within manageable levels, with debt amounting to 56% of GDP based on the rebased economic figures. This government likes to quote the debt to GDP in our time at the old GDP figures, and then they do an adjustment in this time with the current debt to show that the debt level is better than it was under our period. But I mean, that is disingenuous. If you rebase the economy, then same must match with same. You can't compare apples with oranges. We also brought down the rate of accumulation of debt, as has been vividly demonstrated by the former finance minister in his presentation. It became necessary in 2014 for us to go into partnership with the IMF in order to achieve more success implementing our homegrown fiscal consolidation policies that we had crafted as a response to the economic turbulence resulting from the shocks that I have spoken about earlier. Now, when we went to the IMF, this was the 16th time that Ghana was seeking assistance from the IMF as a nation. Though our opponents at the time made it sound as though it was novel and it was anathema, I made a point then that it was to be our last resort to the IMF because I was confident that having the program straddle 3 years, though we had just 2 years left in office, it was going to ensure that a succeeding government would have the opportunity to continue from where we left off and do things that would make subsequent programs completely unnecessary. It is noteworthy that the program was extended by another year by the Akufo-Addo administration, and they received in excess of $300 million, which was the final tranche of the extended credit facility that came with the program. If you remember, the facility was a little over $900 million. And so by the time we left office, some 600 and something million had been disbursed. And so the new administration got the balance of the 300 and something million. I'm on record to have predicted in November 2016 that due to the work we had done to overcome the economic headwinds and the coming on stream of 2 additional oil fields, Sankofa and Tenfield, economic growth was going to exceed 7% in 2017 and beyond. I said this during the State of the Nation address, I predicted. And this was confirmed by the World Bank and IMF, which predicted that growth was going to exceed 8% in 2017 and beyond. Additional oil revenue, a resolved energy crisis, paving way for more and sustained generation of power and sound implementation of our homegrown policies were going to make life more comfortable for the new government that inherited after 2017. Despite these favorable conditions, most of the gains we made and bequeathed to this new government have been eroded, and we've been plunged again into economic crisis. COVID-19 has become the convenient whipping boy and has been cited as the reason for the crisis we face now and the attendant economic hardship. Yes, COVID-19 affected the economy, and no one can dispute that. It is, however, not the main reason why we're in the current hole we find ourselves. COVID-19 only became a pretext for reckless election-related expenditure, which produced the largest ever budget deficit in recent economic history of Ghana last year. Indeed, you would remember that at a time when the new government had just taken over, a year or two after, when things, they were still enjoying the largesse that we had left them, one of the leading members of the government said that their reserves had grown so big that if any external shock affected Ghana, Ghana would be able to go 3 months without seeking any external assistance. I don't know how many of you remember that statement. When COVID hit, it didn't take 2 weeks for the Ghanaian economy to go on its knees. And but for the IMF intervention, I mean, this economy would have collapsed completely. And so much about the resilience of the economy. Our debt has ballooned to unsustainable levels, topping 80% of GDP, and exposing us to very high risk of debt default. Almost all of our tax revenues is used to service our debt and interest rate, and the effect has been the introduction of several new taxes. Indeed, I think I heard Seth say that if you take total revenue, not total tax revenue, total revenue, it covers just compensation, that is wages and salaries and compensation and interest payments. And so everything else, goods and services, capital expenditure, we have to borrow to be able to do. That's the reality of the economy today. And that is why we are on a borrowing spree. And it's a spiral that cannot be sustained. You cannot borrow more than, continue borrowing more than you earn. And so we'll see how that ends up. But this is the reality we're facing today. Almost all our tax revenues is used to service our debts, and the effect has been the introduction of several new taxes. You all know the COVID tax. During the elections, we enjoyed sweet, free water, free power, and at the time, several people warned us that somebody will have to pay for it anyway. Immediately after the elections, when the COVID taxes were brought and we complained, you know, we were told that, well, it was not free to the generators, and so somebody has to pay those who generate the power, and that's why we are being subjected to these new taxes. So this has led to rampant increments in the prices of goods and services, and this is primarily responsible for the hardship that Ghanaians are going through today. A comparison with our neighbors and peers in sub-Saharan Africa, all of whom were also affected by COVID-19, shows that they have been able to protect their citizens from COVID-19 in ways that are similar to ours. They have, however, avoided increasing their debts and deficits because of more prudent management of their economies. And so if you make a comparison of our economy and our neighbors, you find that our economy has been more affected in terms of debt, in terms of deficit, than our neighbors have. And what can account for that? And that is even if you take the statistics at face value. I have accused this finance minister of creative accounting. And now you cannot trust government figures. And before, we left it to academia and research think tanks to interrogate the figures and help us come with a reality of what the economic situation currently is. As he was talking, he mentioned that in many of the budgets, the bailout costs were left as footnotes. The energy sector debt was left as footnotes. And they were not captured as part of the deficit in order to give a better deficit figure. But if you added those liabilities, and there are liabilities that are government liabilities, they are nobody else's liabilities. And so if you are budgeting, you must take cognizance of them. But in order that we can give a better picture, so that when we go on the bond market to borrow, we can get a more favorable borrowing condition, we leave those figures out. And that has become a major problem. This government must accept that it is their mismanagement of the economy, their thirst for consumption expenditure, and the desire to spend beyond their means in order to win elections that have plunged us into the current crisis, not necessarily COVID-19. COVID-19 has exacerbated it, and as COVID normally does, it takes advantage of underlying pre-existing conditions. And so so COVID has taken advantage of the underlying conditions of the economy to make things even worse for us. And so currently our economy is in ICU. And we all must pray hard that we are able to survive as a nation. This government has been the luckiest government under the Fourth Republic. They benefited from 60% of all the oil revenues accruing to Ghana since we began producing oil. Since we began producing oil, if you take all the oil revenues we have earned, 100%, this government alone in 5 years, 4.5 years, has gotten 60% of all those oil revenues. They have had more than twice the total tax revenue available to us. If you take taxes as a whole, they have had 100% more in terms of tax revenues than any of the previous governments before. And they've enjoyed unprecedented support from our development partners. That's the IMF, the World Bank, and all the other partners. Within a space of 12 months, this government has received up to 11 billion Ghana cedis from the IMF alone, and have received over $200 million from the World Bank and other donors. They've had access to over 200 million from the Stabilization Fund that we set up. And they got the central bank to finance them to a tune of 10 billion Ghana cedis. And the comparative with the central bank financing is that in 2016, the budget of Ghana was run the whole of 2016 without one single cedi from the central bank. In 2016, we did zero central bank funding. This government has received 10 billion cedis from the central bank. They've also increased our debt by almost twice the total amount of all previous governments put together. And all of this notwithstanding, they have the least to show in terms of tangible gains or capital investments. It's all gone into consumption. Recently, I noticed a tweet. The good thing about social media is you should be very careful what you tweet or say, because it will come back years later to haunt you. I saw a relative of the president in 2016 had calculated how much I had added to the public debt. And he came to some 28 billion or something like that. And then he divided it by 30 million Ghanaians and said that I have caused every Ghanaian to owe 1,700 Ghana cedis. I don't know how many of you saw it. Just 2 days ago. So I took my pen and I did the same calculation. And his cousin, the president, has added 7,000 Ghana cedis debt to every Ghanaian. And so, I mean, it just shows you, you know, what you do when you do that kind of comparison. And so, just in 4 years, Ghanaians, you know, have had 7,000 Ghana cedis added. To put it in proper context even, by the time I left office, if you added the total public debt, then from Nkrumah till I left office, we had lumbered Ghanaians with a debt per capita of 4,000 Ghana cedis. And then in 4.5 years, his cousin has added 7,000 Ghana cedis to the 4,000. That puts it in even better perspective for you. So these are some of the things that we need to look at. Another major problem has been the unprecedented levels of corruption and total lack of accountability and prudence in the management of the public purse. According to the Auditor General, financial irregularities within the public sector shot up from 700 million Ghana cedis in 2016 to 12 billion cedis in 2020. Procurement infractions have become a major issue. Sole sourcing of everything has become the order of the day. And procurements, yeah, I was making this point. I remember, and Seth, you helped me here, as part of GIFMIS, we had a contract management and procurement, module as part of GIFMIS. I don't know what has happened to that module. Is it still active? It's been deactivated. It was meant to bring more transparency into procurement and contract management. And that was a very important aspect of GIFMIS that we had started to implement. Now, I don't think that module works. Everything has been abandoned. This level of leakage will definitely affect the ability of any government to deliver on its mandate and guarantee the citizens an appreciable standard of living. The nonchalance and total unwillingness to address corruption in government is a major worry and will continue to affect our economic fortunes until the trend stops. When I called for a change in government in 2024, when I said the 8 years has to happen in order that the government can be held accountable and that people don't walk away with their stolen monies, because it's obvious that this president has no will to tackle corruption. Anytime you attack him, they go back and go and resurrect cases from 2016. And I said before, I said the easiest, way of fighting corruption is to prosecute your political opponent. The true test of somebody who is willing to fight corruption is to investigate and prosecute your own. But it's clear that this president has no intention of investigating or prosecuting his own. And that's why the natural order of things that Ghanaians have established is that after 8 years, leave and let a new government come and hold you accountable. And so when I called for a change in government in 2024, as a first step towards halting this hemorrhage of badly needed resources through corruption and holding offending officials to account, our friends in government took offense. But it remains the only viable way to save and protect the public purse in the face of abundant evidence that nothing will be done by this president about the situation. Today we've heard a lot of numbers, and these numbers tell a story. We politicians like to recite numbers with aplomb, believing that they show our superior performance. Our people have often questioned the relevance and importance of these numbers by retorting that they do not reflect in their lives or their pockets. Anytime we talk about GDP growth and inflation going down and things, our people say, well, what's the purpose of all these figures when, life is still so bad for us? They are justified in demanding a correlation between the numbers that we boast about and improvements in their lives. To what extent have we been able to offer a tangible linkage between our talk about stable inflation and our people actually going to the market and finding that prices have remained the same over an extended period of time? No, prices have not remained the same over an extended period of time. Our people are just galled by the hypocrisy of so-called economic experts who in 2016 asked them to forget about economic statistics and look at the escalation of prices of cement and other products on the market. And then today, the same experts in government hold up statistics, including inflation, and say that life is better now for them and that the perception of hardship in Ghana is just a creation of Mahama. And yet when you go on the market, every day you see prices are changing. And they say, no, forget about that. Look at the statistics. Inflation is single digit, And yet the same people in the past said, forget about inflation being single digit. The reality is, look at how prices are changing on the market. This is the kind of hypocrisy that I say is laughable. And there's so many examples of them. When they point about forex rate relation with fundamentals, and then when the same forex thing happens, they say it doesn't necessarily mean that the fundamentals are weak. This is a conundrum for us all. And the question I ask is, how have we all ensured as leaders that when we have touted high economic numbers, it has found expression in the number of jobs that are created within the economy to guarantee our teeming youth a dignified existence within which they are able to meet their needs and those of their dependents? How has economic growth led to actual growth in the lives of our people? So it's not how fast the economy is growing, it is how that growth, is devolved into reflecting in the lives of our people. You can have countries with lower growth, but you find that development and growth of their people is much better. And so it's not just about touting high GDP growth, it is how it reflects on our people. We're at a juncture where these questions have become even more critical. Despondency, disillusionment, and frustration over unmet expectations and our collective inability over the years to translate economic numbers into tangible outcomes and improvements in the living conditions of our people are casting an ominous pall over the enthusiasm that greeted the democratic transition that took place decades ago. Our people are beginning to question whether this whole democratic effort is not only a ruse to guarantee access to the resources of a country to a privileged few elite, to do as they please with it and satisfy their creature comforts to the detriment of the masses who should be the ultimate beneficiaries. The much heralded democratic dividend is fast turning into a mirage far beyond the reach of the people for whom it was intended. There can be no denial of the fact that Ghana is caught in the throes of deep social and economic problems. Mounting unemployment, affecting millions of our young people, ever declining quality of education, problems with our healthcare and agriculture, decaying infrastructure, corruption, weakening and politicization of state institutions, insecurity, unreliable public services continue to make life very difficult for the average Ghanaian. The speed with which hundreds of thousands of young people spontaneously took over social media and demanded that this country be fixed is a cautionary tale on how exactly the people feel about the way this country is being governed. Rather than cynically scoffing at these calls and ascribing political motives to them, and pretending that the genuine cry for help from our citizens is a figment of the imagination of some political leaders, we should be lending a listening ear to these young people, and indeed to our people. The problems of our country and the solutions to them cannot be reduced to a handful of fancy slogans. And so when elections are coming, it's free SHS. Next election, Agenda 111. Our problems go beyond this sloganeering. We have problems in every sphere. And so when the young people say fix the country, they're not talking about sloganeering and a partial fix in one segment or an attempt to fix one segment. It's about looking at the lives of Ghanaians comprehensively and making their lives more meaningful. So the problems facing our country and the solutions to them cannot be reduced to a handful of fancy slogans and poorly conceived and implemented half measures aimed at obtaining short-lived political gratification, only to have them inflict deeper socioeconomic wounds on our country and leave more problems than they resolve. Governance is not about empty sloganeering and PR stunts. It should be about methodical steps that are well conceived and thought through to address our problems holistically and permanently. And it should be about carrying the bulk of our people along with the policies and programs that we come up with. It should be about crafting and rolling out a vision that transforms society in meaningful ways, which will clearly benefit all our people and not just a few.
So Having heard all that, let me welcome you to the NDC program for today. A very good evening to you, wherever. It's actually afternoon, 4 o'clock, where 4:15 now, wherever you are. Thanks for making time to join us on the program for today. Show is produced by Richard Kwanzaa, who is our in-house producer. A big thank you to Emmanuel Owusu, Arnold Abia, and of course, Comrade Richard Ahnija and the NDC Pro Forum that's put this show together. A big thank you to them. Today, we are having a conversation on the economy with two people who understand this better than any other person you can think about. Dr. Jerry Monfant is an international monetary policy advisor with EFRAG and European Union. Dr. Kofi Anochie Owusu-Darko is a chartered banker and organization development consultant. Both of them I'm having a conversation with shortly. Now, but before we go there, Kwanzaa, if that video is ready, former President Mahama did say some frank, very straightforward things about the economy. Now, in saying all those things, I'm sure he also knows that he's setting a particular standard for himself. Well, this is the response of President Akufo-Addo, if you have it. Okay, so Kwanzaa will get that for us shortly. When he gets that, we'll play it. The response of President Akufo-Addo to all that has been said by former President John Dramani Mahama. In the meantime, welcome once again to the show. Let me welcome my panel, by the way. Let me say good evening first to Dr. Jerry Monfant. I know quite well, and I believe I have a date with him somewhere this week. Doc, good morning to you, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm online. Most grateful, and I'll fulfill the appointment we have. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to that. I have a one-on-one conversation with him on the Go Power Drive subsequently in the week. But I also have joining me Dr. Kofi Anochie Owusu-Darko. First time having a conversation with him. Doc, good evening to you.
Good evening. Good evening. How are you?
I am well, and I hope you are too, Doc.
Yes, yeah. I'm okay. Looking forward to the program.
Okay, we are starting shortly. He's a chartered banker and an organization development consultant. There's a lot of conversations we'll be having. The key question for our President Mahama raises is the issue of, if you look at the numbers, if we talk about numbers and economics, how does the economic growth that we keep talking about, and we're going to play that video of President Akufo-Addo because he goes to talk about the fact that the economy under him has grown better than under former President John Dramani Mahama. The question is, how does that translate into the improvement of the livelihoods of the people? So we'll try and get that video. But whilst we're doing that, let me start first with Dr. Monfant on this issue. There's a question that I'll ask Dr. Kofi Anochie too. Doc, Dr. Monfant, first of all,
Yes.
I think that the general question that we all try to answer is, when you talk about the economy of Ghana, exactly what are we talking about? Are we talking about some isolated figures somewhere, or exactly what is it supposed to be?
Okay, thanks so much for asking me this question. When we talk about economy, we refer to the individual living standards. It is the living standards that translate into the entire economy. There is no way you could come up with economic calculations of calculating your GDP without taking into consideration total goods and services provided by the people living within the country. And to be able to quantify the goods and services which should show an improvement in their life, what certainly means that their living standard would have been better. Before you would be able to generate something to come out to say that this is economy. I always say this, and I keep on saying this almost every time, that economy we created. The economy is not an inheritance. It's not about rhetoric. It's not about any other form. But economy is purely about the way we do things, about the way people live. Economy has come to live with us as a culture. And for that matter, if you have a policy which necessarily does not translate into a better living standards into people's life and bringing money into people's pocket, then suddenly it means that you're not running the economy. You might be running something else. or probably you might be running an income and expenditure by the government, but you are not running the economy. That is my definition of economy.
So essentially, it's about the total amount of work we put in as a people, maybe within a period under review.
That's right. So it certainly means that the work that we do, how we grow our life. If last year I'm worth about, let's say, 10 cedis, of this year, if I should worth about 20 cedis, it means that there had been improvement in my living standard. And I would have had access of buying other things I couldn't have bought last year. And the much that I have an ability to buy those things that I couldn't have bought, suddenly also put money in people's pocket who sells the items that I could buy now, which I couldn't have bought last year. And that goes in whole and in full to lift up the living standard of the entire economy. And that is what we call economy.
Thank you. Dr. Anochi, do you agree?
Yes, I do, because you could come from, when you speak about economy, you can have different perspectives of what you mean by the economy. It can be production, productivity, somebody could look at it from that perspective, living standards, you look at it from that perspective, development as well. So all in total will give you what we mean by the economy. So you could get people describing different aspects of it, and it's still trying to describe the economy.
Having said that, then what essentially is this thing about GDP growth and everything that we talk about? If, as an economist, Dr. Noche, if somebody tells you my economy has grown, GDP has grown, exactly what is the person telling you?
The person is then looking at the total basket of goods and services that have been produced. So when and living standards also going up. So when the person tells you that GDP has gone up, then it means that total production of goods and services in total has gone up to the benefit. What is important is that to the benefit of the ordinary person and everybody living in that country. So basically that is what it is. You could go on statistics and talk about GDP has gone up and it's not affecting anybody because it's gone up in non-productive areas really. So when you're talking about GDP figures and comparing, it should translate to impact on the lives of the people.
Well, Dr. Moffat, you wanted to share a view?
Yes, I wanted to share a view. I wanted to give a typical example of what it means by the time when we had the Pro Forum public lectures, which was presented by the former president, John Mahama. The analysis, so that you tend to appreciate more what is it that we are doing and what is it that we should have been able to do. When he mounted the platform, the first thing that he said was that the economy he's going to talk about is going to be based on bread and butter. And if it's on bread and butter, then it means that we have to refer to how the economy had been managed historically. So what he did was that he mentioned that in 1980s there was droughts, and because there was droughts, there was food shortages. And when there was food shortages, inflation was very high. We had this kind of hyperinflation growing within that very 1980s. I remember so well in 1983, I was still young and I could still feel the situation as it were, and as it was enumerated by the former president. Now, under that circumstances, you realize that the PNDC government by then, as he mentioned, the PNDC government by then was able to, improve the economy's fortune, from the 80s. And then this was as a result also of a falling in commodity prices of most of our goods that we were exporting. That had actually exacerbated the major situations when there was an effort to even resuscitate the economy from the 1980s. Now, the question that we should ask ourselves now currently is that why could a fall in commodity prices, which is a natural resources, which is a naturally built, a naturally grown commodities. For example, we had a cocoa by then, we had a gold by then. Probably we didn't have oil by then. But if this were the major commodities that we were relying on to survive our economy, as soon as the prices were hit in the world market in 1990s, it turned out to be that it crumbled the Ghanaian economy, and this was coupled with drought. Now, why should a falling commodity make the economy or the entire economy come aground? In 1980s, why should the economy come aground? Have we learned something out of it? Because if it was commodity prices that determined the growth of the economy, and then it turned out to be that we have flagging or we have falling commodity prices, then the entire economy will have to come to its knees. Then there is something suspicious that we have to actually work at it. Now, he also mentioned that coming down forward, when Kufuor took over, the Kufuor's administration to Ghana, they went in for HIPIC, and the HIPIC was to leave the Ghanaian economy. So therefore, we were given a total relief of about $3.8 billion. And this $3.8 billion was to enable our economy try to have some breather. And it also created a very significant fiscal space that could allow the government to really produce much more, very more. Upon Kufuor government also realized on this, Kufuor's government tilted a little bit more into service. So you realize from the 2000s, we had the services overtaking agriculture. That certainly means that we have a lot of people within the service industry. And this was also coupled with some of the organizations that came into the country, like the Ghana telecommunications industry was liberalized. So we had MTN by then, which was Ariba or Vodafone. And then we equally have Kasapa, those kind of things, those kind of industries. They came into the economy. So they expanded in the economy. So once they expanded the economy, we had a lot of Bank of Ghana issuing licenses to allow people to open financial institutions. And that equally expanded the service sector. So the service sector became much more bigger than the agricultural sector, coming down from the 2000s, which was introduced by Kufuor. The later part of the President Kufuor's period, we were able to discover oil in a commercial quantities. So this is also another natural resource. So it came into to fuse up into the economy. And while it fused up into the economy, it gave us a lot of breather. It made us to be able to feel like, look, we have much more natural resources to support up the service industry and also support up the agricultural industry, which has been led by cocoa within the agricultural industry. So Ghana is to join the League of Oil Producing Countries within the 2000s upon discovery of oil. Now, the other funny thing that you should look at is this. There was a global financial crisis, and this global financial crisis hit up much more early days of 2007 and 2008. And while the global crisis got in, then it has a lot of impact, and then it possibly triggered off some of the crude oil prices in the global market. So the crude oil prices went down, and suddenly it tilted the economy back again into a much more challenging situation within this very time. It was by then that we had Professor Mills who took over. So Professor Mills equally also inherited a very large deficit and a huge chunk of the currency depreciation also took place within that very time, because our import dependent, which has got to do with the crude oil that we discovered within a very short time, together with cocoa and the gold prices, because there was a hit up. It made sure that we didn't have a lot of foreign currencies into our economy. So because of that, there was a huge depreciation of the cedi, and that necessarily made us have an upheaval within our currency market or our forex market in 2007 and 2008. Now, the economy grew better in 2010. 2010 was without oil. In 2010, what was that oil? Now, the economy recovery was actually, we had a boom, which actually put up the economy to about 8%. And this was within the NDC regime anyway. And it also pushed up with oil, the economy was able to grow to 14%. With oil, that was in 2011. And this was the highest in 40 years since Ghana had its independence. Within 40 years, we hadn't grown about 14%. And this was also within the NDC period. So it means that within NDC period, they were able to grow the economy more. Then the oil growth for the year was, let's say, with non-oil, when you take oil out of it, the economy actually grew by 8.4% in the following year. Then in 2012, the economy grew by 9.3%. We achieved the longest sustained period of single-digit inflation, which was up to about 53 months. And that was a very great record that had been set by NDC during that very period. The cyclical shocks came back with a vengeance between 2013 and 2016. And this included the problems with the power production. We had the doomsday coming in, and unreliable gas supply into our engines, and suddenly there was a breakdown in the economic situation that was faced. Just as a brief up to this point, this was part of the President Mahamat's historical antecedents of what has actually happened during this period of time from the 1980s to date as a historical antecedents to give us a clear picture of what exactly the economy is and what we are not doing and what we should have done. Now, you realize that upon all these categories that I gave, they were all heavily dependent on natural resources. We had oil prices going down, boom and bust within the global market, and things going down. And once it goes down, the economy goes down. Once commodity price picks up, then the economy picks up. Once commodity goes down, the economy goes down. And it has a lot of impact on our GDP growth. Now, this is it. A very good economy, despite the fact that we've done well and we've accounted very well for ourselves during this period, NDC has actually been able to do well by engineering a very huge growth, moving the entire GDP growth to about 14% in 2011 and possibly 8% in 2010, and so on and so forth. If the people who are inhabitants of the economy, if their living standard had improved, despite the fact that there would have been a shake-up in the commodity prices, we would have been more resilient to the economy. We should have been able to survive the economy. The challenge that we do have since the historical antecedent, before we even come down, has necessarily been the fact that our heavily dependent on the natural resources have been our economic woes since independence. And this very government coming in made everybody believe in the economy that there's going to be hope. And the hope that we're going to have is that the economy is going to be turned around. So they have bandied around a lot of economic jargon that has got to do with economic variables, economic currency exchanges, economic inflation power, economic employment power. They use all these things to come to power. So suddenly we believe that they would have come with a different model. And the different model that we were all thinking has got to do with the living standard of the people. How they would have been able to ease the living standard of the people, giving them the leverage and advantage to be able to grow this economy so that we will not be so much import dependent, and we will not be so much natural resource dependent, and we will not be so much a raw material dependent country. That would have necessarily changed it. In all, we failed, and they have failed the economy woefully. They have failed the people woefully. They were not able to implement what they decided to do. Now you realize that situation have been compounded. The situation that is compounded now today, I want you to know once again that if you did not develop your people, if you did not develop the resources of your people, if you did not develop the standard of living of your people, you are creating the kind of mess, and you're not creating the economy. You are rather being you're running an inherited economy and not the creation of economy. A typical example is this. You have your finance minister come back and tells you that we need revenue. We have to improve revenue. And the question is, why do you need revenue? You need to assure your lenders, those who borrow money to you, that in this you are able to raise money to pay off your debt. So because of that, you need to raise revenue. Which area are you going to raise revenue? Suddenly you're looking at the citizens and nobody else. And the best way you would want to do would be to increase taxes, to increase a great number of taxes, to be able to generate money, to cushion up the fiscal gap. And that would necessarily give you the mandate to give your lenders assurances that you will be able to pay. Now, the simple question we should all ask ourselves is that, how do you raise money from poor people who could not necessarily be engineered and be beneficial of your policies to improve their living standard? If they could not improve their living standard, how are they going to generate money to pay you that revenue or to pay you that taxes for you to be able to generate enough revenue? That's the question we should ask ourselves. And this is to tell us that if you want to raise economy, if you want to build up economy, you would be so smart that you want to build the standard of living of your people. Once you build the standard of living of your people, you would be able to generate enough taxation to be able to run. Now, if you're going to charge further taxation for the poor people whose revenue or whose toil and effort is not supported and backed by government policy, and could not produce well, and could not become competitive, and their productivity level is low, this has a total reflection about the kind of taxation that you have. Go through the statistical service, the revenue, internal revenue service, GRE, and you will get to realize that the huge taxpayers are the foreign companies, not from the citizens. The huge taxpayers are the MTNs, the Anglo Gold, the Newmont, the energy sectors. These are holding about 80% of entire tax being paid for the government to run.
Okay.
So the foreigners are running the economy. At a point in time where there will be a capital flight from this country, that will be the very time that you realize that there will be a flat revenue. We will not be able to generate any other revenue from within to even pay off here or not there. So therefore, when we talk about economic growth, and we are talking about GDP growth, all that we mean is the betterment of the people, the contribution of individuals that possibly might have raised up this economy to be able to put it through a sound footing would be the only way we can get a better GDP growth. But if we have to go by the history that was read by the former president, that has actually gone to let us understand that our heavy dependence of natural resources, that has got to do with the commodities. That is the reason why anytime there is a shock, the country ran down. Anytime there is a shock, the country ran down. I think there should be a different way we may have to think. I'm only trying to say this to fill in the gap of what the GDP is all about.
Great.
And what is GDP.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for recounting our history. Let me bring in Dr. Nochi now. So Dr. Monfada has already gone through the history and also talked about the kind of lessons he's learning from the history that was told by former President Mahama. I don't know if you listened to what the former president said, because he went through the issue of the Fourth Republic, the economy in the Fourth Republic. What are the main things you picked from the history he outlined?
Actually, let me go to the Dr. Mafa has spoken a lot about the history. Let me go to what amused me a lot about the enduring long-term solutions he gave to his challenges, as against what he called the short-lived political gratification of the present government. Managing the economy is about what you do in crisis and how you put in tools to reverse the present situation for a lasting development for the country. Now, what he did was that the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, the PRMA, he spoke about it. And that was a tool, that was a long-term tool that he put in place. And this is to do with the collection, allocation, and management of our petroleum revenue. So what he tried to do was to ring-fence that, and then brought in what the energy debt service account. This was to take care of toll and forex and recoveries in the downstream petroleum sector. The downstream petroleum sector foreign exchange problems were affected banks a lot. That was the bane of banking at that time. So putting in this solution was to make sure that the bank debts were paid. And if this had been continued, obviously the banking crisis and the no-brainer resolution that was taken by this present government would not have been done, because we had a long-term plan. The former president had a long-term plan to pay off these banks and gradually make them profitable, because a lot of debt was due to this downstream companies owing banks and then having exchange losses, and they couldn't cover their cost. So that was one. 12 would have been resolved. When you go there too, it gives us the power generation infrastructure support account. That was also under the PRMA. So after having the energy debt service account, the power generation infrastructure support account was also created. This was to develop power utility debt, the supply and sustainability of power, and then infrastructure as well. So that was also put in place for a long-term solution. The next was price stabilization and recovery account, also under the PRMA. So, and that was also to give buffer for the under recovery in the petroleum sector. And then consumer price stabilization. So consumers too were going to benefit from any shocks in the petroleum prices to stabilize consumers. So these were, when you look at the PRMA that the former president spoke about, they were in to give long-standing solutions, not short-lived political gratification. And then he went on to talk about the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund. That was also another tool, long-term lasting solution. This was to take care of critical infrastructure projects. And he mentioned that it was out of that we had the Terminal 3. So he was trying to provide long-term solutions to the development of our economy, and maybe that was the bane, because it takes time for these things to actualize. And the present government is actually now enjoying some of the benefits of those long-term lasting solutions that were taken. Now, the Ghana Infrastructure Fund was to mobilize and manage investment in infrastructure projects for national development, debt and equity financing, and then to create, so they had the power to create sub-funds, to create subsidiaries in other jurisdictions, to invest in assets and investment of any kind. So you could see that this was a fund that could have taken care of the Ejapa deal straight. There was no need for any, this could have solved that situation, because they were given the power to invest in any asset of any kind. Now, they also had the power, the investment fund had the power to own or partner anybody to raise funds in the local and international market. These were long-term, lasting, enduring solutions, which takes time to actually bear fruit. Also was the Ghana Exim Bank. The Ghana Exim Bank consolidated IDIF, the Export Finance Company, and Exim Guarantee Company. They were all put together to make sure that we had a coherent and more focused approach to our export market, moving us from trying to be so much of import dependent, and trying to find a way for us to get into the export market. So that was going to lead us to a sustainable export-led economy, build capacity, and develop international trade. He then went on to speak about the sinking fund that he created. These are all, like I'm saying, enduring solutions to economic growth. Now, what did he do with the sinking fund? It's like an escrow account, right? You owe somebody, a debt that you definitely pay, because President Kufuor has taken the first sovereign bond. It will mature. So what do? You put some monies aside, and then obviously, and that was used to 550 was used to pay some of the debts of President Kufuor's debts that matured in 2017. In that same sinking fund, $200 million was left to this present government. If this government had continued, we'll with time be reducing our foreign debt obligations. So this created an orderly redemption of our Euro bonds. If it continued, we could even do an early redemption to bring credibility to us on the international market. Now, the golden rule really is you have to use long-term funds for compound expenditure, and then you use your short-term bills for liquidity management. If you don't do that, this is so simple. It's no brainer. It's not rocket science. You cannot use short for a long-term capex when you fall into liquidity crisis. The next thing he said was that he left the present government with there were 2 oil fields. We started production in 2017, which he didn't have access to. So this present government has really had a lot of inflows coming to for them to benefit from. when you talk about the TVO, from a little bit of the historical, the TVO rates were dropping since 2014 to 2016, and it continued. So obviously, this government took over a situation where the treasury bill rate was dropping. So obviously, but after that, it started rising again. Industry, if you take industry from 2014 to 2016, you had that green sector and the mineral industry growth. There was growth. So the growth continued until within 2017, and it started falling. So the former president's economic challenges, he tried to solve them, and the benefits, this government got the benefit in the first year, 2017, till still started going worse again. So that was those were the joint tools he put in place to make sure that we develop as a country and have long-standing and joint solutions. But well, that takes time.
I'm going to come back to you because you said something about the banking sector crisis and the way it was resolved. In fact, you called it a no-brainer resolution. But let me just bring in Dr. Monfort again. Doc, listening to Dr. Kofi Anoche, I think you said something about an economy is created, not inherited. Dr. Kofi Anoche is essentially making the point that at some point in the life of the former administration under former President Mahama, there seemed to have been some conscious attempt to deal with the cyclical shocks that you were talking about. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree. I agree because basically there was a lot that President Mahama did, or the NDC did, during their tenure. And when you have to match it up, you'll realize that the debt to GDP as of then was about 56% to the GDP. That's why that was after the rebasing. It was about 56% to the GDP. Currently, what we're talking about in this very current government, you realize that the debt to GDP has ballooned to an unsustainable level, topping up to 80% of the GDP, exposing us to a high risk of debt default. And suddenly, we haven't had a good news coming from the Moody's, who actually have to reevaluate the Ghana's rating, which is actually putting us at B3 negative. And if you are at B3 negative, I kept on saying that you are just a step away to junk. And if you're a step away to junk, it means that your future borrowing, no matter how it is not going to go down, because that is the basis that they're looking at. And they will possibly also be looking at the debt affordability rate. And if debt affordability rate would be in a situation, not more than 40% or 40% of your revenues is used to pay interest. As currently, as we speak, we use much more of our revenues in paying interest accruing on loans. So certainly that has thrown Ghana far away as compared to the President Mahama's regime as how it was. Despite the fact that we were trying to look at our fiscal management and the policy of the management, which has been so much effective, you realize that it was much more better, far better under President Mahama's regime than the President Akufo-Addo's regime. A typical example, the former president, enumerated and actually also said was that during his tenure, that was in 2016, the corruption index actually put it, or the Auditor General actually put it that corruption within the public sector was actually being evaluated to be around 700 million. And then if you look at currently, it is now grown to about 12 billion. That is a very high stakes index. So that certainly means that things are not too well with us. So indeed, I would have to reinforce what Dr. Anoche has actually said with the basis of the fact that there was a serious attempt. If you have looked at even the historical antecedent, it tells us that most of the times when the economy goes down, NDC government will come down, try to resuscitate the economy, and before you say jack, the FPP coming back to power will derail the economy, and then it will go through a downward spiral. So therefore, I do agree completely based on the indicators and based on the figures to show that there was a conscious effort from the NDC side to revamp the economy and to make the economy better. And there is something that I could say, which when you come to comparing the two parties, you tend to realize that NDC have always got new ideas. They've got brilliant ideas. They've got a new way to go about things as compared to what MPP has. MPP situation has always been much more rhetorical. And when you look at most of their policy interventions, which we all think that indeed they are coming in to reinforce the position of the economy to grow, It always comes and then you realize that it just becomes a joke of the century. Most of the policies that they are rolling out are quite positions that you realize that it was good idea from the onset, but the implementation has been very much poor. I wonder why in any situation, MPP would like to label NDC as incompetent. But when you look at themselves, you can see that the incompetence is a homegrown strategy within the MPP. I'm sorry for this language. The challenge that you see is that, for example, we have one dam, one village, one dam. I don't know what has come the state of it, but this has been a state resources that has been allocated to be able to get this policy ruled out. So therefore, we are not seeing the benefit of this, and we've not seen what they have that have been able to sustain. For the one district, one factory, I have already spoken about it on a different platform. And then with the senior high school situation, we all know the situation in which we find ourselves currently. So therefore, all these policies have not worked well for the MPP government. But what does baffle all of us is that these policies go with financial budget. And if it's going with financial budget, that is the reason why you could see from the MPP side that the huge amount of money that they have invested into it. When they came to pick power, when NDC's debt to GDP rate was around 122 billion, they are not jumping more than 300 billion. And when you look at the margin, you can't point out what exactly it was used for. The reason you can't point out what it was used for was a poor policy thought out and poor policy implementations. If you have a poor thinking models and your thinking model is not being able to transform into a reality of what exactly you want to achieve, this is amounting to much more costly financial loss to the state than any other thing. I wouldn't relate this to negligence. I would relate this to a poor planning and an incompetent policies that might have possibly led us into wherever we are. So indeed, there was a true conscious effort being put in place by NDC government to try as much as possible to turn around the economy. And the poor policies implementation from the MPP side is derailing it. And this would give NDC government, future government, a lot of challenges for which to really to battle. Because the economy in its current state is not the best mood, or it's not in the best shape. And that is what I think I have to say at the moment as far as the economic ramifications are concerned, and to reinforcing the position of Dr. Anoche.
Well, if you just join us, we are having a debate on the state of the economy currently. I have Dr. Jerry Combat-Monfort with me. I also have Dr. Kofi Anoche joining us. Dr. Anoche, like I said, I was coming back to you on this issue. Big issue, the resolution of the banking sector crisis. When you were talking about the things that the National Democratic Congress did when they were in power, you highlighted what they were going to do about the banking sector crisis, and you were confident it would have worked. Why? What makes you so confident that would have worked?
Because actually, you see, when you're dealing with the economy, first you should remember you're dealing with lives. You're dealing with people and people's standard of living. Now, if you use a textbook approach where you go to any business school that tells you if this thing happens, what do you do? Then you say you pull the plug. That is what, if you ask 100 business school graduates, now what do you do? They'll all say you pull the plug. That you are not thinking. You have to think when you go into situations like this, and you should remember the NDC is a social democratic party. You have to look at how it will impact on any decision, how it will impact on the lives of the people. If you don't care about the lives of the people, then you go the way this government has gone. But what the NDC decided to do was, if you look at when the ESLA was created, over a period, by 2024, it was supposed to generate over 40 billion. If you take the banking crisis, the bank itself is a separate legal entity that has also suffered as, let's say, a person. Then you kill that person. The person that has also suffered. What has it got to do with what you perceive has been mismanagement? Deal with the people. Now, the same banking sector had, you say you want to grow the economy, employment, right? Now, if you want to grow employment and you want to increase your GDP as well, why all those people that have been laid off, are they working now? Are they paying taxes? So we had a situation where we did not even have to think outside the box. We had to think without a box. That was a situation that you think about without a box. And then if you say you are doing economic management, that is when you have to still save the separate legal entity, the bank, and save the people. So in effect, the NDC, it was unfortunate the NDC went out of power, because this banking crisis would have been resolved with a much more humane attitude towards it, because lives were at stake. Now what do we have? You've done what any other person that went to business school or did whatever could do. Now, so then what? So that is why I'm saying that approach was a no-brainer approach, and we're still going to suffer. They created the new bank, and let's see whether the new bank is doing well. So basically, I think it was a knee-jerk approach. It was using the law and going to the act and saying that it gives us the power to do this. So you use your power, and then what? So the NDC is much more, like I'm saying, it's much more a social democratic party, and whatever the NDC intends to do, if it's not going to impact positively on the lives of the people, it will not necessarily use the rule book. It will think without a box.
Let's examine that a bit, because I recall something Dr. Jeremy Fan said. You create an economy.
And was considered at the
it is not inherited.
We were all here.
So yes. I'm guessing that these banks, all of the banks that were indigenous banks. 7% These banks were a key part of the economy. So once they were collapsed in a manner in which they were collapsed, should there have been an expectation of some shocks to the economy because of what had been done?
Even after the embrace of the IMF, left out
the government has done an impact analysis.
No doubt that disarray.
Because any decision you take, you must look at how it's going to impact. And obviously, this is, you don't have to say it, you should know that it had negative impact on the economy. It is so much deep. And you know what is going to happen? That is why I read in the Bank of Ghana report that bank fraud has gone up.
Mismanagement. I mean,
why wouldn't bank fraud go up? Because the people who you lay off are much more experienced than the people who are in it. And what is going to happen? They know the insides and outside of the banking system, and fraud will go up. They have to survive. Some of them will go into that. So at the end of the day, it's zero sum. What did you achieve? Nothing.
The rate of growth of our national economy.
The long-term solutions by John Dramani Mahama, His Excellency, is, I don't know whether that has been the bane of the NDC. Instead of doing short term for people to see and everybody, and it's like it's the political gratification. Maybe that wins vote. But he did say, you realize that he's somebody who does not necessarily want to win votes for election's sake, but wants to develop the living standard and increase the living standards of the ordinary Ghanaian.
Let me jump to Dr. Monfand on his take on this issue of because it was one of the biggest issues we talk about. It costs us a lot of money to do that. A lot of monies have to be borrowed to actually pay for the banking sector cleanup. What do you make of, what is your own thought on the approach?
Okay. I'm somebody who has because I'm coming from a monetary policy background, I seem to understand the situation much more better when it comes to such a reckless position that was done by the NDC government. I call it reckless because there is nowhere under the sun that such approach has ever been able to rescue an economy before. Let me give you a typical example. I kept saying that economic growth of every country is not about innovations and it's not about inventions. And it's purely got to do with credit that grows an economy. If you take a country like the United States, you tend to realize that a credit form about 50 trillion of the United States economy. And the actual cash transaction with the United States is about just 3 trillion for the United States economy. So therefore, anybody who plays with the issue of credit as a means of reviving the economy and increasing productivity, it means that a person is very ignorant about how economy operates. This is the way it does. For example, let's take it on a layman's position that you have a person who farms with a hoe, who farms with a farm hoe and cattle losses. And then you decided to advance the person a credit, a loan credit, and the person is able to afford a tractor. Suddenly, the productivity of this person will grow. It means that if he was farming 1 acre, he will now farm about 5 acres because he now has a tractor to be able to farm more. So therefore, when his productivity goes up, his standard of living will certainly go up. And that is the growth of economy. In every country, they use the banking system to be able to grow the economy. Iceland has used those methods, and that method has helped Iceland a lot. And Iceland was one of the first countries that was able to come out of the global financial crisis, just because of the fact that they have their own krona. They were not dependent on the euro, they were using krona. And they've been able to quickly come out of the financial crisis quick. United States was able to come out from the financial crisis because they were using dollars and they're using what we call the financial transmission mechanism through the system to be able to improve the standard of living of people. Economy, as I keep on saying, that is created. What I mean by it's created means that it's a deliberate attempt. It's a deliberate policies that you have to put in place to be able to engineer growth to get people grow. Now, you come down to the Ghanaian banking system. What you realize is that within the Ghanaian banking system, they run with runnable deposits. And what I mean by runnable deposit is that it is people contributions that they put into the bank. And while they put people's contributions, this has been one of the limiting factors within the country. That is why they cannot grant a loan more than 2 years or 24 months. Because they are quite scared that when you're using runnable deposits and you have to pay, you would have to pay for long-term loan, you are likely to have liquidity challenges and liquidity difficulties. Now, the fact that you have to go to revoke people licenses, collapse people banks recklessly, is just because of the fact that you feel they might have either met up a requirement or not met up a requirement, would affect the credit into the private sector within the economy. And credit to the private sector is basically one of the engines of growth that we use to be able to make sure productivity is growing. We have a lot of talented people in Ghana, We have children even under 10 years, manufacturing, manufacturing vehicles or manufacturing container things that necessarily work. We have University of KNUST, University of Science and Tech, being able to produce full paradigm machine. But under normal circumstances, because they don't have credit, they don't have money to be able to modernize it and fashion it well to get it to the global standards. So therefore, what happens is that this institution will have an idea, but they cannot bring it to the fore. And that becomes a bigger of a challenge. So every country that I have realized and I have studied across the globe, most often than not, use the banking system as a credit means to be able to engineer and grow the standard of living of their people. That's what it's been used for. Now, let me tell you another confusing state. That should tell you that they did it without thinking. When the president of Ghana, President Akufo-Addo, was inaugurating the governors and the board of directors of Bank of Ghana, the question he asked himself was this: why on earth had this situation been that the policy rate is much more down, but the banking sector is not reducing the policy rate down? Because borrowing from the commercial market is more expensive. However, we've been hearing the monetary policy always comes out with the policy that the Bank of Ghana had actually pegged up policy rates at, let's say, 14%. But when you go to the banks, it's just around about, let's say, 29 to about 30%, which is so huge, looking at the margin between the policy rate as against the market rate. It does not correspond. And do you know the reason? Let me tell you the reason. The reason is that because the banks borrow their money from the public, because it is the deposit that they use in giving a credit. So they have to safeguard against risks. And if they have to safeguard against risk, it means that the interest rate will certainly would have to go high to be able to cushion them up in case there's a trouble. And when there is a trouble, they know the government has no alternative than to revoke their licenses. So listening to Bank of Ghana policy rate is no starter. So because of that, it is having a policy confusion within the sector. And now, if there is a policy confusion within the sector, why would you, under normal circumstances, at a reasonable situation, go revoking licenses, killing a bank that indeed you realize about 4.9 billion would have been able to solve the problem? Then you end up using 22 billion cedis to pay our people to go and stay home. And let me tell you one other critical thing. For the 2 years that people are not working, it means that productivity within the country had gone down. And in 2019, for the first time, Ghana went into recession. I don't know what people know about recession, but recession is a situation whereby you realize that you have a downward spiral on your GDP growth and your economic status. 2019, 2020, we had about the economy was to grow by 1.9%. And that was a recession, looking at the growth rate and looking at the gap and the evil. So therefore, if you had gone to implement a banking policy so recklessly like this, and I have always told you, in banking policies, we have two ways. We have the banking, we have the financial crisis, and then we have a systemic crisis. A systemic crisis is a situation that is much more attributable to behavioral. And the behavioral has got to do with the kind of way our people run financial institutions. We have a lot of third-party borrowing. When you go to most of the banks that they collapse, the third-party borrowing is a situation whereby some of the directors would have to take a loan for their sister companies. And if their sister companies are not able to pay, then it locks up liquidity, and then it brings up a problem. Collapsing and revoking the licenses hasn't solved the problem. Collapsing and revoking the licenses just merely give a collapsed system and a collapsed economy when it comes to the financial sector. And I can tell you that the credit to the private sector is now dwindling, absolutely, not like before. And when there is that signal, it tells you that the economy is not growing. It tells you that the economy is not breathing. A typical example that I've always given narrative had been this. We have Nigerians who are operating in the Ghanaian market. These Nigerians have been chased out of the market. Ask me the reason. Why would you chase Nigerians out for selling spare parts? They will tell you that it's a protective area. But let me tell you something. It couldn't be a protective area because we don't manufacture car parts in Ghana. We import car parts. So it cannot be protected. But let me tell you, a flop policy that necessarily would have brought us to this level. Look at this situation. You want to grow your local entrepreneurs. Your entrepreneurs borrow at the cost of less than 29 to 30% of interest rate in the commercial market. Probably in Nigeria, they borrow with a commercial rate at 16%. So therefore, if they would have to come to your market, they can sell their produce or they can sell their product much more lesser than you can do. A Ghanaian entrepreneur would have to start with a loss of 24% of a loan you have taken. How would you be able to be competitive? You can't be competitive. And closing down the bank means that you will be taking much more liquidity from the banking sector because the 22 billion cedis that was closed down and was paid is a money that was taken from the economic system. So if you've taken this money from the economic system, or you have stored this money for about 2 years, while you've not paid them and you've closed the bank and they cannot access the funds, it tells you that it definitely has a consequence. And the consequence is that your economy is going to suffer. And that is the situation in which we are. To talk about how to run back this economy and get this economy back on shape, it is not difficult. We will talk about that one another time. Thank you.
No, in fact, I'll be raising a few questions on that. What can be done immediately? But Dr. Anoche, I don't know if you have something to add because I want to play the president's response to the former president before. So add what you wanted to add, and I'll go to the president.
Let me add to the monetary policy rate issue. Just recently, you had a senior advisor to the president and lamenting that policy rates have reduced, but the banks are not responding, and it's not making the economy to grow, lending to the private sector, and that. My little practical experience in banking has been that, let's go to economics 101, the central bank being lender of last resort. And like Dr. Moffat said, the banks are are borrowing deposits, retail deposits, and that is what they are on lending. Now, if they are going to the Bank of Ghana to borrow, how many banks are borrowing from the Bank of Ghana to on lend? I don't think it does have. They use that to shore up short-term liquidity crisis in terms of daily check clearing and that sort of thing. The big banks would not go, and I don't think Bank of Ghana will consistently allow banks to use them as cheap funds to borrow and on lend. So once they are not borrowing and on lending, the cost of funds of banks, as is calculated in some basket of tools, that is just a small part of it. So if my cost of funds is still from the retail deposits, where I'm borrowing short term from the retail deposits, and then trying to on-lend long-term, which will give me liquidity crisis and gaps, that will have a systemic effect on the banking sector. So linking the monetary policy rate to bank lending is theoretical. I mean, all things being equal, like they say, it should happen, but we are not that sensitive in our economy. It's not that sensitive. Now, a sticker example, layman's example, reduce the lending rate for the businesses in Katamanto, or those importing spare parts. Reduce it, they will not necessarily impact on the prices because they'll say they have other costs. They'll say they have other costs. So obviously, they were also complaining, the senior advisor was complaining that now because there are a lot of bad debts, just a few people are now, of course, that is the banking sector, the banks are not, so it's not social welfare. So if some people are not paying and it's not a bad debt, that is also part of the calculation of the cost of funds. So basically, we are running an economy that you need to think without a box. If you are going to use traditional ways of textbook, look, let me give you an example. Typical example. As we stand here, I don't know about you, but if you gave somebody $100, right? The normal rational person, you give somebody $100 and give the person 1 million cedis. The rational being, the rational economic being, thinking being, must take the 1,000. I'm talking about 1,000 Ghana cedis and $100. Must take the 1,000 Ghana cedis. The rational economic being. But now put $100 down and put 1,000 Ghana cedis down. Most of us will go for the $100. Even when you give us the rational thinking that when you change, you are going to get 600, what we're going to say, it doesn't matter. So when you have an economy like this, and you have the economic beings thinking like this, you need to think outside the box and not use the normal textbook, business school, economics to solve some of these problems. So like Dr. Moffat said, the banks are still borrowing from the normal market at expensive rates. And the monetary policy rate will have little or no effect, though it should, but that is what it is. That's what I'll add to it.
Thank you. Doc, the two doctors are with me. Let me go. Let's go and listen to the president's response to what the former president said. He was speaking in a radio interview. It was quite brief on it, and this is the approach he chose. Kwanzaa.
That when you look at the records, that this political leader can accuse my government of mismanagement. I mean, there are a few facts that when you put on the table to compare his performance in office and mine, will tell you that if what I'm offering people is economic mismanagement, I wonder what words should we describe his stewardship of Ghana? And a mitigated disaster. I mean, that's how I would call it. There's some few facts. When we left office in 2016, the rate of growth of our national economy was 3.4%, the lowest in 24 years at the time, the lowest. The very next year, the economy rebounded to 7%. I think it was 8-point-something% the very first year. And from then until the COVID, we averaged 7% rate of GDP growth. If these statistics, which pointed to an economy that was working and was considered at the time, I think we were all here, as one of the fastest growing economies in the world, not just in Africa, but in the world, at an average 7% GDP growth rate, can be considered economic mismanagement, then the economic policies of the government that took us into the embrace of the IMF, and even after the embrace of the IMF, left our economy in the disarray that it did in 2016. And I have no doubt that that disarray contributed significantly to the decision of the Ghanaian people to
of former President Mahama, and that's my response to him. Okay, so let me allow the two of you. First, let me start with Dr. Monfant. What do you make of that response?
Okay, to battle that response immediately, I think when I was reading the previous history of the Ghanaian economy under NDC government, the economy was able to grow to 14%. That had never happened before. And then it subsequently followed by 8-point-something%. And then it moved away from there to 9.3% in 2012. So it means that in 2011, the economy grew to 14%, which we've not had any economy that had grew up to 14% since this government took over. And then 8.4%, he was referring to 7.7%. And NDC government was able to make it to 8.4% the subsequent year. And in 2012, they made it up to 9.3%. That is the highest GDP growth that had ever been seen. So where he is speaking from, I think there is something that is not actually adding up. But there is something to that you should be able to see, that the very time NDC was leaving power by then, I presume, and I know that there was the oil fields that they had was just 2 oil fields. NPP had a lot of oil fields within the set period. And the very time we grew the economy up to 1.9%, that was in 2020. The clear challenge that we had was the commodity prices, when the commodity prices went down. But they attributed to COVID, which was not COVID. So when the commodity prices went down in the global market, then the oil prices went down. So it was like the kind of straw that they were holding has actually been uprooted. So they didn't have anything to hold. So they have to fall down completely. That was the reason why I give the historical antecedents. And I was actually trying to say that this economy is being managed by natural resources. So within your period or within the regime, if the natural resources prices happen to go up, suddenly your GDP would go up. It's automatic. And it doesn't mean that you've done anything to the economy. The simplest question you should ask this government would be that, what exactly have they done very differently to have been able to increase up the GDP rates to whatever they are talking about? What exactly have they been able to do? Is it an increase in export? And if it's an increase in export, can we identify which commodities that was increase in export to have brought in that returns? There was nothing of that nature that had been able to be done. Now, the second bit of it is that when the government says that they've been able to grow the economy, there is another thing that I want you to know, which the vice president always uses and accusing NDC for. It has got to do with inflation rate. And they're like, within the NDC period, we have a very high inflation rate. And the inflation rate is much more lower within the NPP regime. The challenge that you have to look at is critically this. Inflation is by the way we spend the money. And necessarily every economy know, or anybody who is a very good economist will tell you that to expand the economy when economy is actually not doing well. One of the other areas the government might use to do would be using an expansionary tactics. And expansionary tactics has got to do with moving into capital project and infrastructure. Capital project and infrastructure brings a lot of money into people's pocket, unless they move the model, which I will not go to qualify. Now, what it means is that once you decided to inject much more money into building up the Circle Interchange, building up the Legon Hospital, building up the Reach Hospital, building up the Bank of Ghana Hospital, building up so many infrastructure roads, that should tell you that this will relieve the economy. It will bring a lot of money into the economy. Once it brings a lot of money into the economy, it has a little bit relationship, or it has some form of relationship with your inflation pressures. So there is a much possibility that inflation will start going up a little bit. Indeed, all of us would have been surprised, like I said, I would have been very much surprised if this government, upon the expenditure on consumption that goes through people's pocket, could have fueled inflation. I would have been shocked. The inflation could not move up because there is no infrastructure. Money doesn't go in because, let me tell you, economy is about the people. Once the people spend, economy grow. Once government spend, economy doesn't grow. That is the two different things people don't know. If a government would have to spend on themselves and spend on areas that does not necessarily trickle the money into people's pocket, you will not see inflation. That is one thing you should know. And that is economic mystery and myth and misinterpretation that they don't know. So therefore, if the money would have to go into, let's say, construction, you'll get the construction workers getting money. The laborers would get money. The masons will get money. Other people will get money. So you will realize that there would definitely be money into the economy. People's pocket would grow and it will get it work. So if this government is saying that the GDP growth within their regime had grown within 7% over and over again, and that had been better off than any other government, I will tell you that we may have to ask for the numbers. We need to know what is sparking the GDP rate to grow. Whether it is purely by a price increment, or let's say commodity price increments in the international market that has actually fueled the price growth, or it is based on the fact that the government has actually done something which is unique that we all don't know. So I don't buy that idea, and I don't stand by that idea. What I can tell you point blank is that this government has been poorly managing the economy. No successful policy that the government has even rolled out that I've ever seen, as far as this country is concerned. If you do remember very well, they introduced the digitization policy that every household will have to be digitized. And then they went ahead to come out with a Ghana Post. The Ghana Post would have to give you the location of your house and the number that is related to your house. What has happened to it? They rely absolutely on the GPS that we know, which was established by the United States in the skies, for we to be able to do a directional way to our houses. So which policy is this? Which way has that policy impacted on the growth of our GDP? Which of the policies? Can somebody tell me the policy condition and where one district, one factory has contributed to the GDP? Can somebody tell me where we have one village, one dam has grew the economy? And as we said now, we have a threat of food. And we are believing that maize is likely, the prices are likely to spike up because we do not have enough rain this time. So where is the dam that the government has built? Why are we not getting much more yield? Why are we not looking at our export level this time that we're going to export food? So what is the impact of one village, one dam? What is the impact of one district, one factory? How many commodities are we exporting this time? What is the tonnage? How much are we bringing in as a foreign currency? The country was recently bailed out on the issue of our foreign reserves, just because we don't have enough reserves in foreign currency. So because of that, the IMF would have to give us the drawing rights system for Ghana to be able to convert its own into reserves and see whether that reserve would be able to use as a foreign currency to reduce our interest rate or interest on borrowings or loan repayment, which is imminent and which is due. Tell me, if you have a very educated mind within the system, and the government is telling you that we have done well, I think we need the numbers, we need the interpretations, we need the figures. We want to know where the growth is coming from. But from where I sit, I can tell you point blank that indeed none of their policy orientation has actually yielded any economic growth and have been impacted as a way of raising down the economy. What I know is that we have been playing around our commodities, and that is what is keeping the economy, and nothing else. The government response to him is that they haven't done well, and they haven't produced better. Thank you, Sena.
Thank you. Dr. Noche.
Yes.
So your thoughts on what the president has said?
I think what the president did was speak English and then add statistics, choosing a convenient period. Because if you look at the 2010, like Dr. Manford said, the economy grew by 8%. With oil in 2011, 14.4% in 2011. Non-oil growth was 8.4%. Now, let's look at times you have to look at what resources you have and how you used it, because that brings you to efficiency of economic management. Look at the inflows for the MPP. As the former president said, 60% of oil revenue is accruing to them since the oil production. 60% has gone to them. Twice tax revenue available to them that the Mahama government did not have. They have twice the tax revenue. They have donor funds. IMF has given 11 billion Ghana cedis, World Bank 200 million USDs. The Stabilization Fund, they had 200 million USD. Bank of Ghana has given 10 billion. Now, the Mahama administration went on zero financing from Bank of Ghana in 2016. So what came in and how have you used it? Then you can compare like with like. If the government, if the central bank is giving you 10 billion, what can't you do with it? And the Mahama government had zero financing, but still the highest growth in terms of the period, non-oil example, was in 2011. So when you pick and choose periods, and you don't look at what you let go or don't talk about what you got to achieve that growth, then you are not comparing like to like. So and you know it's short. It was a short response because that is the only response that can be given.
There's a point where he mentions COVID, and I remember, and of course, when the former President Mahama was talking about, he talks about COVID becoming the whipping boy. The Vice President has also been talking on this matter. I'll come to him because he has become the digitizer. He essentially doesn't do a lot of talk on the economy anymore. It's all about digitization. So I'll ask a question about how that is. But let me read to you comments that he's made recently. He said, that was yesterday, throughout the world, price of goods have shot up. Shipping cost of container from China to Europe has increased from around $2,000 in August last year to $13,000 now per container, 650% increase. You also have major goods that have gone up as a result of COVID. And all of you in the construction industry know that the world prices for cement and for iron rods have really shot up. So when we see same things happening in Ghana, we know why it is happening. It is a global phenomenon as a result of the pandemic. We are trying to manage the impact in Ghana, and we are not doing too badly compared to many other countries, and we have to do even better. We have completed projects with most of your members, and we resolve to consolidate. But there's a point where he's talking about the competent management of the economy. Says, I think I'm missing that point. But essentially, it all comes back to COVID. You heard the president say, we're doing so well until COVID came in. What do you make of that whole COVID excuse now being the main excuse of the government? Dr. Noche first.
Yes, if you look at the historical perspective His Excellency Mahama gave, at any point in our economy there has been shocks, from bushfires, from in Rawlings' time, from global financial crisis in Kufuor's time. Rawlings found a solution. Kufuor took us to HIPIC to get some space in the fiscal phase. Mills, through to His Excellency John Mahama, also had an energy crisis. So, and even Ebola, he had Ebola. So it is what you do in terms of crisis that gives you, that you could then say that the economy is being managed. But if it is business as usual, and you can only do inflation and all business as usual issues, then you don't have the competence to manage the economy. COVID has come in, yes, but even in the normal health issues, like the former president, COVID will not kill if you don't have underlying ailments. The economy was already broke, and COVID obviously would have exacerbated it. But if you have the men and you can think without a box, then you have to solve it. Like you rightly said, our vice president is now the digitization man, because he's running away from the economy. The textbook economics that you learn, that he has learned, cannot solve this economy that we have, that you have to think without a box. You don't even have to think outside the box. So he's now moved into digitization, moving into a safe haven. He should come back to talk about the economics, and we'll have people like Dr. Mulford and others to talk to him about it. So basically, COVID has been over. It's like, I'm sure the present government just thank God the COVID came, because I don't know what explanation they would have given. COVID came with its own inflows. So if you want to ring fence COVID, the inflows that came in, you could have used that to ring fence COVID and deal with COVID issues without it impacting on the economy. Look at the monies we've had. Even internally, we donated funds towards COVID. We borrowed money towards COVID. So those monies were supposed to be the stopgap that would have resolved the normal day-to-day non-COVID environment. So if you have the money, why now talk about COVID again? It actually beats my mind. So using COVID, the former president Mahama did not say energy crisis and he just gave up. Kufuor did not say, the President Kufuor did not say global financial crisis and just gave up. The late Jerry Rawlings did not say the bushfires and all those things that came, so just gave up. Fix the economy. That is what I've got to say with this COVID situation, because this COVID, they are just using it, and everybody has COVID. If you go to Finland, Estonia, those countries, they all had COVID. And they were able to resolve it, and they resolved it using, because you see, they've used the internet digitization. So when you take the education, for example, within a week, Finland moved online, all their schools online. And then even now, some of the students believe that the online is even better for them than face-to-face. Those are some of the enduring things you put in place. President Mahama was putting in place infrastructure, fiber infrastructure for growth, for internet access and universal access. So that's why I keep on saying that I'm sure that is the bane of the NDC, trying to think long-term beyond 4 years. But you see, that is a social democratic party. And when you have those values, those ideals, it happens that it's easy to go to go beyond that. So COVID should never be an excuse for any government, because there was energy crisis, there was Ebola, and His Excellency Mahama solved it, and then left behind an economy that was ready for growth. And it's all gone down the drain.
Dr. Monfort, on the issue of COVID.
Yes, sir. On the issue of COVID, yes, great. Basically, during the COVID became advantageous for a lot of countries around the world, except Ghanaians that see COVID as a monster. And let me tell you the reason. COVID actually came in and there was a disruption in the world supply chain. So necessarily what it means is that a lot of import and export was stopped. Having to look at Ghana as an import-dependent country, it suddenly means that if there was COVID and there was no much import, suddenly that is to mean that we would have had stabilization in our currency. That is what it means. Now, during the COVID period, Many countries in Europe and Southeast Asia had stabilized, and in some cases, their currencies grew more stronger. The local currencies grew stronger against the dollar during the COVID period. And the reason being that if you have about 80% or 100% or 70% of your produce being an imported ones, and there is a slowdown because majority of our import was coming from China, and the COVID started from China. So if China had slowed down in the supply chain, then there is a high possibility that the import that we might be importing from China would have gone down. And other countries had also gone down because we went through lockdown. But very strangely, during the COVID period, we had our foreign exchange moving up. Our currency was losing strength against the major currencies. And the reasons can best be interpreted that, as at this very time, Ghanaians we were paying for a huge interest in the debt that we were owing through the foreign currency, other countries. And because of that, we still struggle to be able to mobilize dollar. So this is to tell us that, look, COVID hasn't done anything to the Ghanaian economy. We have other countries that COVID actually might have affected them. But Ghana could have been very exceptional, even if it is global. And I have a reason for saying this. For example, if you are an export-driven country, if most of your goods have to be exported and there is COVID, it means that it will stall your export. And it is your export that brings in the foreign currency. Once you have a foreign currency, it means that it's trading up your current account. And it suddenly gives you a very much more better position when it comes to your central bank reserves. Now, Ghana does not produce and send. The other funny thing you should look at is that when did COVID strike? The COVID strike on the 12th May 2020 in Ghana. That was the first time it was announced in Ghana. That was on the 12th May 2020. So now, as of this time, we have already exhausted our main cocoa season export, which is one of our heavily dependent commodity. During that time, gold prices were better. It was quite stable. It was moving much more reasonable. The challenge that we had during that period or before that period has got to do with oil. That was the petroleum industry. And the reason was this. The reason was, I kept on reinforcing this position, that the reason was coming from the Russia and the Gulf, who actually are the major oil producers in the world. Because the cartel that was the Gulf state wanted to cut down production to be able to make sure that oil gained more prices upward. And the Russia was actually definitely not in support. So once Russia was not in support, the bottom line was that Saudi Arabia decided that they will be producing more than 12,000 or more than so many tons of oil into the world market. And that influenced the world market prices of oil to go down. And that was actually the reason why fuel prices went down considerably during the COVID. And it was not because of the COVID that oil prices went down. So therefore, if you're hiding behind COVID, that COVID was the reason why your economy is not working, I think you can tell that to people who are not deep thinkers. It will be an insult for you to necessarily go back to the state and say that it is the COVID that has actually crippled your economy. Your economy was actually down. As at that time, you had already finished exporting your cocoa. And the cocoa prices was charged with the normal prices, as it were. And the price was okay for a cocoa pricing. And the gold price was quite reasonable as at that time. The oil prices were just affected by disagreement between the pricing and the model that had to be used by the Gulf state and the Russians. So under what basis would you blame it that the oil has actually, the COVID has actually been the effect of the economy? Even besides that one, let's put it aside. Now I'm going to go through the technicality with the response as to the way when it happens, it happens. In the world of economy, or in the world of monetary economy, this is the way it is. We have this we call a cyclical. Dr. Amachi was trying to explain that point further for you to understand that. Historically, they've talked about the kind of the challenges that we go, the ups and downs, that is the booms and busts. And the booms and busts has got to do with a situation we've been dealing for so many years. If it is coming from 1980s, and former president had made it known that from 1980s, there have been a cyclical challenges within our growth and our downturn. Then there is something critical we have to look at here. Usually what happens is that the monetary policy, which is responsible of trying to engineer much more funding and loosen up the economy and tighten up the economy, they hold the key. That is the way it is. It is only in Ghana, I am not seeing so. It is a central banking system or the monetary banking system that holds the key. They pull it down and make sure they loosen up the economy when they realize that we are in a cyclical challenges or critical crisis. And they tighten it up when they realize that there is a boom and you don't want to spark inflation. That is the work of the central banking system. Okay. So, under such circumstances, what we have to do as a policy response from the economic point of view would be that you respond to loosen up the economy. You don't tighten up the economy when things go bad. But a simple question that you have to look at is that usually I don't like calling people incompetent. Neither do I like calling people the words that they are not deserving. But at certain times, our way and attitude makes people feel like we don't know it. It makes us feel we don't know it. The reason is simple. At the particular point that COVID has actually ruined your country, the best way you have to do would be to loosen up the economy and not to tighten up the economy. It is at the same time that you are increasing taxes on petroleum, increasing taxes on the cost of products. As I'm speaking to you now, Sena is charging VAT on their properties. That is, if you rent, you'll be paying VAT. The government has planned to introduce taxations on rent, which is to take effect by next year, or probably closer by the end of this year and next year. And these measures are what we call a tightening of economic measures. That's what it means. This is a type of the time that you start pulling the economy back. Now, why would you like to tighten the economy when the economy needs a freeze or when the economy needs a lose up? You are tightening the economy right away. You are saying that the COVID has actually affected everything. And if the economy, if the COVID has affected everything, then the assumption is that the economy could be moving on a tightrope. And if it is moving on a tightrope, the monetary response will be that you have to loosen up the economy. But if at the same time, your policy response would be to introduce taxes, that would mean that you are using austerity measures at a point in time that you are supposed to use a leveraging policy to leverage the economy. Or at the point in time that you have to loosen up, you are using a tightening economic policy. So if you are using a tightening economic policy when you are supposed to be losing the economy, how do you want us to describe you? Competent, negligent, unaware, or a lack of detail into what goes on into the economy? So instead of we using what we call a counter-cyclical policy response, we are using a pro-cyclical response. And that is the worst economic policy you can ever implement if you are coming from a monetary point. Now, let me give you a second position. The government central bank comes up with a policy. And the policy was that because we are in a difficulty due to the COVID, we should reduce the policy rate from 16% to 14.5%. We went ahead to do that. And when we did that, what was the reason? The reason was that the government wanted to loosen up the economy by freeing up cash to people. Now, how do you free up cash to people? You want to rely on the banks that are using runnable deposit of people to loosen up the economy. Which kind of economic principle is this? Where did you learn this economy from? Let's take that one aside. Then the other bit of it is that the same government going through the same market to compete with the industries, to compete with the individuals, trying as much as possible, selling out your treasury bills and bonds into the local market to mop up excess cash when we don't even have cash in the market to even give out credit. So what happens is that you have a policy rate that has been reduced, and you are in the market borrowing from the banks, and every bank with the risk margins getting to know that because we are in COVID, if this point in time, if you decided to give a loan to individuals, they wouldn't be able to pay because of the COVID pandemic and because of the dynamics within the economy, and also within the fact that you had closed up banks and you haven't released that cash to the banks for them to even pay up depositors, for them to have money to be able to spend. Because it is only when you spend that economy grows. When one's expenditure becomes one's income, that is the way economy grows, and that is the way standard of living is done. As far as that policy has not been done, you stifle the economy. That is one. After stifling the economy, you come back again into the economy and borrow money from the economy using your bonds and treasury. And then you go back again and say that I'm reducing policy rate to about 14%, just to allow people to borrow. Where are they going to get the money to borrow to loosen up the economy? That's a confused policy rate. There is nobody who understands the economy would like to approach at the method that they are. But I strongly believe that at a much more fine time, they would need a proper response for them to know that when we talk about incompetences has not got to do with rhetorics. Incompetences has got to do with exhibition of your ability to turn around the economy using economic tools, which is quite acceptable, implementable, that have been effective in other countries, for we to be able to say that indeed, at this point in time, you're not incompetent. You've been able to turn the economy, and the growth will speak for itself. But as it is, and where we are with this kind of economic growth, and looking at the economic performances, it will be the worst economic policy and strategy implementation I would ever support. Thank you, Sena.
Thank you very much. Let me bring it back, Dr. Nochi, on this issue, because a lot of people are asking, in this time, where is our vice president? One time economic messiah, a former deputy governor of the Bank of Ghana, the man who knows there's money at the Bank of Ghana that we're coming to use to develop this economy, all of a sudden is shifting to digitization. But there are those who say that is also not entirely disconnected from economic management, that somehow it is connected. Do you agree that a focus on digitization can be helpful to the economy? Doc?
Am I the one or am I the one?
Actually, Dr. Kofi Anochi.
Okay.
Of course, digitalization is key to the economy, because we have a digital economy. And if you look at the next generation, they are going to do a lot of things in the digital economy. But you see, you have to get same thing. You have to get the fundamentals right. You have to develop the infrastructure. Now, we seem to want to have instant results of what we're doing because of political expediency, and that is the problem with the present government. Because if you take in public sector and you are digitizing the operations of the public sector, it means that you're trying to take our traditional public sector into the digital economy in the form of e-government. If you do that, and at the same time you are not taking a holistic approach to it, and you then want to tax the very medium that will take us online with respect to the data we use, the internet, and then the voice. So somebody else somewhere is taxing it, and you expect us to, and when it comes to technology, you have to find a way to diffuse the adopted technology you are taking. So it's adoption and diffusing of it. But in one side, we are just doing showmanship, we are digitizing, and then on the other side, you are imposing taxes because that environment has become more fluid. So you have to let it go. You have to let it diffuse to a point that nobody will want to do the traditional anymore and want to go online. And online is the way forward. So when you do that, and we know that we can't come back, then that is okay. But this is just trying to, and it's not being done holistically, because if you have one ministry that you are digitizing, you are not digitizing the other ministry that is part of the value chain, then what are we doing? So that e-government, you see, I don't know why the present government likes moving away from things that have been started and built or not, because this is all part of the e-government. We are calling it digitalization. Let it be the e-government project and let it grow with it. Because going forward, if we don't take care, the next generation cannot do anything on that. And if we want to go e-government and digitization, maybe ICT should be compulsory, maybe from class 1 upwards, because that is the tool they are going to use. So if you don't take a holistic approach, and you are taking approach as the former president would say, just a political gratification of short-term results, then this is what we're going to get. But digitalization is very important to the economy, because we have what we call the digital economy, and that is the way forward. But now the issue is implementation. The issue is implementation. Lofty idea, and it's not something that was started by the vice president. E-government project has been there since ages. E-government project has been there since ages, and this is just part of it.
So
I would
please land for me.
Yes, I was going to say, I wanted to, once you're done, I wanted to, because the former president also spoke about financial irregularities, and it was an area I think I wanted to talk about. But let's finish with this.
Okay. Because I was going to ask you another question on the vice president. Whether there's also the feeling that perhaps we anointed him economic messiah too early. People perhaps had faith in him that they could not justify. Do you also, are you one of those who agree with that suggestion?
Yes, I think, you see, he spoke a lot of, I always say, a lot of English and a lot of theory. And then gave us hope that he could resolve it. But he didn't place his economic theory on the ground as to how our economy is. To find a way and think, like I always say, think without a box, to match, adapt what he has learned, and then adapt it to suit our economy. So later, when he realized that he couldn't do that anymore, then he moved into digitization, a safe place. So obviously, I think he's been overrated, really, and I think now everybody knows that he's been overrated. Because all the indicators, all the over 101 questions or so he posed to our late Vice President, Mr. Atta, I don't know whether he'll be able to answer, because those questions are still relevant today. I don't know whether he'll be able to speak to those questions.
We should put these old questions back to him.
Yes, put his own questions back to him, and he should tell us that he has resolved those things during his time.
Dr. Mumford, on the issue of digitization.
Yes. Very good. The global is going through digitization. For example, in the European Union and the European Commission, basically we were tasked to come up with a reporting standard on the blockchain and the cryptocurrency and the central banking digital currency. So we worked on it. We're even still waiting for the report to be approved. So basically, tokenism had been the order of the day. We tried to look at a way that we could digitize various currencies, and that one would be a free flow for everybody, for a way to actually see how fundings could be done. So digitization is very important, especially within the financial market and capital market as well. It is actually really linked up to the economy, but depending on whichever way your digitization is. I hope the digitization is not got to do with numbering houses, and also got to do with trying to have some other functionalities. But digitization is a great way to go. The Central Bank of Ghana, I've also heard that they are going to digitize their point system, so which is also on the limelight. So I strongly believe that digitization has come to stay and is an order of the day. But the truth about the whole thing is that the issue that you came up with, and you asked a very good, reasonable questions with regards to whether the vice president is overhyped. I get myself confused over and over again because I listen over and over again his speeches from the onset, but I'm beginning to believe that maybe he speaks it. He has never practiced it, and he has never touched on it. That could be one of the reasons why maybe he does so. Because I believe that there is a very sound functioning economic policies that, when implemented, can turn around this economy. This economy should not be a poor economy. We have got economies, we have got countries, we have got other things, which doesn't have even a quarter of what Ghanaians have. And they've been able to move from a third world country to a first world country. And I strongly believe that if we will not just throw our hands in the air and suddenly get back and think, I like Dr. Anoche's position that the guy had been theoretical. Very important. But we should not also be mistaken to become more political without being realistic as to how to turn the economy around. Or else, we would also find ourselves in the same box. We will be talkatives. We will not be implementers and will not be practitioners. So therefore, it is my strong conviction and suggestion that when one falls, sometimes we don't laugh. You take a lesson and crew out of it. And then you look at it that, how would you be able to do it better than the losing guy that has done? I can assure you that the economy has not been run well. People are feeling the heat. And I'm certain and sure with some degree that indeed NDC would come back to power in 2024. And just the very time, NDC would have to tell them the difference as to economic management. NDC has got a perfect record in changing economic narrative. But at this point in time, NDC will create the economy. We will not inherit it from them. Thank you.
I realized Dr. Anoche wanted to make a quick comment on that. That's the whole area altogether on financial misappropriation, financial irregularities. Actually, Doc, we have about some 2 minutes ago. Is it time enough for you to just make some quick comments? I think we should come back and discuss in detail. Yeah.
It's just a short comment. I'll just do it in a minute. If you look at the former president made mention of the Auditor's General Report and said in 2016, the financial irregularities were about 700 million. And in 2020, it moved to 12 billion. Now, my take is this. Public sector financing is different from private sector accounting and financing. Mm-hmm. So if we have a finance minister who is corporate finance and private sector oriented, in private sector, the end justifies the means. In public sector, the end is as good as the means. So if you are making profit, private sector, if you cut expenses and make profit, you are a guru. In public sector, if you cut expenses, it means the economy is not growing. You've not done any savings, and you've got situations where they keep on saying, and we done savings here, you done savings here. It means that you are not growing the economy. So obviously, if you are using that same mindset in private sector into public sector, you're going to have a lot of irregularities and procedural improprieties, and that is all I want to say on that.
Is that a suggestion that our finance minister is using a private sector approach.
The orientation, when you bring that orientation into this thing that the end justifies the means, I mean, just do it. It doesn't matter. Once you are making savings, when you do that, you're going to have a lot of financial impropriety. And that is what, because when you're private sector mindset, which is good at some time because you want to bring efficiency, you don't run public sector financing like that. You don't.
I'm hoping perhaps we can have another show where we put a lot of the initiatives that this government has put in place under scrutiny, because we haven't gone into detail with issues with regards to one district, one factory, one village. Some comments were made, but if it can be arranged so that we have a conversation into detail on some of these issues, I'll be very glad. But I want to thank you, Dr. Kofi Anochi and Dr. Jerry Combat Monfan, for joining me this evening. It was wonderful engaging you too.
Can I make?
Okay.
Sorry. Can I just make a point before?
No problem.
My quick point is that. Very good. My quick point is that he is not using the private sector experience into public sector experience. The bottom line is that he is not using economics, because economics. If you're using economics ideas to run the country, you will suddenly know what we call the private sector economy and public sector economy. So the bottom line is that maybe they are not competent when it comes to using the economic policies and strategies intended around the economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's been a pleasure engaging the two of you. My name is Sena Nombo. I would like to say a very big thank you to Emmanuel Owusu. A very big thank you to him, who did majority of the arrangement, with a lot of support from Arnold Apia and also Comrade Richard Anglija and the NDC Pro from US. A good evening to NDC Pro from UK and the bigger mother body. I saw Dr. Komaje who appear watching at some point in the show. So good evening to you. Show was produced in-house by Richard Kwanzaa. We'll be back same time next week with another edition of the show. We'd like to say a big thank you to those who joined us on YouTube. I didn't acknowledge you from the very beginning. A very big thank you for joining us on that platform. If you're listening to us, next time we are doing this program, you can join us on that platform and watch us. Have a wonderful evening.